All right, welcome everyone. You definitely don't need to be afraid of the seats up front if you want to get a better viewing position. You also don't need me to guilt you into moving up to the front if you don't want to. But hi everyone, my name is Jeff Tuff. I lead all of Deloitte's sustainability work globally in the energy, resources, and industrial sectors. I'm thrilled to be here today and to have you all here today at what is the beginning of a collaboration between Deloitte and Climate Group called the Energy Transition Action Program. I won't go into a ton of detail on what this is right now, except to say that we are working together and hope to be working together for some period of time now, bringing together the public and private sectors in order to actually get to scale in the energy transition and do some of the really difficult things that we need to be able to do together. So this session is the beginning of that initiative. I will point you to the slide we have up on the screen here right now. Ness, my partner, will talk a little bit more about this at the end, but we've got a second session on Wednesday that actually still has some availability in it if you would like to take part. There are two parts to it. The first is some fireside chats with David Crane from the DOE and with the ASA from the Army. And then afterwards, we've got actually a closed session that is the beginning of a working group to define the problem that we will be trying to work on together in ensuing sessions through the fall and into the winter. That is an invite-only event, but we are interested in knowing who's interested in being invited to that. It doesn't mean we have space for everyone, but if you hit that QR code, you should find a place to be able to sign up for both of those. All right, that's it for the paid promotional advertisements. This session is actually going to have two different parts. I'm going to be having a conversation with two panelists in a moment, then Ness will be coming up and continuing it. This first part is going to be with Ethan Zindler and Matt Helgeson. If I could ask the two of you to come up right now. We have Ethan, who is the climate counselor for the Department of Treasury, and Matt Helgeson, who is the head of sustainability for Siemens. And so we'll be getting into a conversation broadly about the topics that we're hoping to cover in this broader collaboration between Deloitte and Climate Group. But I'm going to kick us off, and we will be moving here quickly. And I hope you were ready for the question. You knew was coming anyway. So we know that we have got a massive amount of increasing demand for energy as we go through the energy transition and as we build out the infrastructure we need to accomplish the things we need to in the energy transition. What are public and private doing to come together to try to meet some of that demand? And I'll look for which one of you jumps at the mic fastest to start us off in an answer to that.
Well, I'll just start out as the government bureaucrat here. And hi, everybody. I'm Ethan Zindler. I'm the climate counselor at the Treasury Department. Treasury may not be, well, for those of you in the know, will know how involved we are in climate and energy-related stuff. But for those who aren't, we do a lot of things at the Treasury Department that are very directly relevant to the energy transition, including from the domestic perspective, helping to write the details on the tax code with the IRS. And given that so much of how we support energy transition in this country is through the tax code and tax credits, we're at the heart of a lot of the kind of key decisions that get made around how these get implemented. So to take a step back, as has probably been mentioned at this conference today, the Inflation Reduction Act on its own is the single most important piece of climate legislation ever passed in U.S. history, and it is making, in our view, a very noticeable impact on the market already in terms of the sheer volumes of capital, in terms of the amount of clean energy that's been deployed to date. There's a long way to go, and the rate of acceleration needs to continue to go up if we want to address climate change comprehensively. But overall, I think we've been very pleased with the capital flows that we've seen. Almost $500 billion was invested in the 24 months since the IRA was passed. That was up about 70% from the prior 2 years. Like I said, a lot of activity to go. I'll stop there, but happy to kind of talk more about the role that we play at Treasury and some of the other things that are going on across the U.S. government to try and be supportive of this transition.
And before you dive in, if I could just ask you, Ethan, can you comment at all about how you see the IRA impacting the supply or the demand sides of the equation, and where you think it has more impact and where it might actually shift things?
Yeah, so again, the IRA does a lot of different things, obviously. It has all kinds of multiple types of grant programs and others that are primarily administered through the Department of Energy, the EPA, and others, where we're involved on our tax credits. And basically, that's, for the most part, we're talking about carrots to give people incentives to change behavior and make certain types of investment. So that's often on the supply side, frankly, in terms of trying to motivate the addition of new renewable capacity, the build out of new energy storage, any number of other different technologies in terms of the things that we're focusing overall. So I would say it has a heavy emphasis around the supply side, and certainly on the demand side, as we see with the energy sector right now, particularly the electricity sector, a lot of new pressure being prompted, both, which is a good news story from economic growth, more manufacturing, which is a great story for the US, but also, of course, AI and the demands that that's placing with new data centers and others. So there's a lot of demand pressure coming, and I imagine that's been touched on earlier today as well.
Great, thank you. Matt?
Sure, and I can probably speak maybe more to the demand side. So, as speaking also through, I guess, the corporate lens, Siemens has committed to be net zero in our operational emissions by 2030 with a 90% physical emissions reduction. And so what that means for us is, no stone is left unturned in terms of action and decarbonization. That's primarily our vehicle fleet and our facilities. And so our facilities, the footprint of our facilities is really driven by the natural gas that we use in our production processes. And so from the demand side of the equation, as we work to electrify the manufacturing and the equipment at our manufacturing facilities to come off of natural gas, of course, our electricity demand increases. And so we are in the midst of it. We are having conversations with local utilities, as we speak, as we plan out the next 4 to 5 years of facility electrification projects. And just a little bit of our experience, maybe. At our first pass through, we were seeing numbers like doubling the electricity requirements of our facilities. And so you can imagine the reaction that had amongst our leadership teams. And so we took a little bit more time with that, and we did realize that the numbers may not be as significant as we expected, but it didn't take that challenge off the table. And so a couple things that we've done beyond really truly evaluating the needs there is to start to look around. And so we have neighbors with large manufacturing facilities that are across the street from us who are making similar commitments. And so we're starting to have conversations with companies, that maybe we've just driven past before, who are working towards the same kind of goals and having the same kind of challenges, but regionally, we're working with the same utilities. And so, you do everything you can to get in line early, right, and to have that proactive conversation. But I think that would probably be my advice as we work through this. And, and again, this is a real life issue for us, just in order to reach the commitments that we've made.
So when you say you're having conversations with, and how I took that, Matt, was that there are other manufacturing, either companies or manufacturers generally in your same vicinity that will also increase the load.
Right. Yeah.
What are the conversations you're having with them? Let us have it, not you? Or is it an arm wrestle?
A little bit. And they're early. And so I don't really have like the full success story to share yet. Maybe next year I can come and tell that at the end of the story. But right now it's mostly about the utility, just getting to the utility together.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to get the numbers to line up to give the utility a true accurate expectation. So it's less about, we need this and you can't have it because we're going to get there first, and more about let's make sure they really understand what this pocket of manufacturing facilities is going to need over the next 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Let's talk, and I'm going to go off script a little bit. I hope you guys are cool with that. Let's talk a little bit about just the timing and how long it takes incentives, tax incentives, for example, to impact on the supply side when the demand is actually needed, especially as we see what everyone is predicting is an exponential increase in demand, especially because of the data centers for AI. How do you think about getting the timing right? And maybe we'll start with you, Ethan, between releasing some of the economic incentives from tax law and actually being ready when the utilities need to provide that power.
Well, I mean, candidly, we can do what we can do, and so within our purview at Treasury and also some of the other federal agencies, our main goal is to implement the IRA to the best extent that we can. We do believe that if we do it right, it unlocks the additional capital and additional growth. And we're very happy with the fact that we've seen some of the strongest quarters for clean energy deployment, including some technologies that help with greater flexibility, including record build for new utility scale batteries. But we need a lot more of that going forward. So from a policymaker perspective, you know, we kind of have the tools that we have, and we're trying to do our best to kind of put them in place to address it. There is clearly an ongoing issue around the availability of adequate transmission to build out the kind of additional capacity that's required. And I know there's efforts in Congress to try and address this overall, but you know there is a real issue. You know, whatever figure you want to look at, whether it's 1,000 gigawatts or higher of clean energy projects that are supposedly in queues around the United States, unable to actually get online because there is not sufficient transmission capacity. So that's not something that we can sort of wave a magic wand and sort of address. There are interesting proposals that are out there, but it's also a state and local issue to a large degree in terms of resolving a number of these issues.
And so what role does, and I want to hear your answer too on the timing in a sec, Matt, but what role does Treasury, or sorry, what conversations does Treasury have with other agencies to try to ensure there is the kind of working across the system? Does that happen much?
So we do as best we can. I mean, but again, a large, in terms of our day-to-day job is to try to understand more broadly, but then go about our business. And we have some fairly specific tasks that need to be achieved, and we're looking to get done, many of them before the end of the year and beyond, which regards sort of the nitty-gritty implementation of the IRA, which has, like I said, it's got about almost over 20 different tax credits that are specifically trying to gin up things like investments in energy efficiency and renewables and biofuels and hydrogen and all other things. So getting those details right is really critical, and trying to send signals to the market so that those in the private sector can invest with some confidence. That's sort of the main role that we can play at Treasury, and certainly we're in touch with our friends at the White House and DOE and others about what they're up to as well. But our number one job is to just get the IRA fully rolled out and implemented. And we feel pretty good that if we do that, like, good things are going to happen, and we feel like we've seen a lot of good things so far.
Yeah. Matt, back to the timing question. I mean, I would imagine that you in your position at Siemens are thinking about this from at least two different angles. One, the decarbonization commitments you've made as a company, and I guess the question there is, do you see the type of supply coming online fast, of clean energy coming online, clean electrons coming online fast enough to allow you to do what you need to do? But then Siemens obviously as a provider of technologies is helping others decarbonize as well, which kind of, I would guess, exacerbates the supply challenge.
Right. It's an opportunity for some of our businesses, right, to serve that need, of course, and it's a challenge for us operationally because we've made commitments on a timeline not necessarily connected to transmission upgrades that are required. And so we are right in the midst of understanding the impact that that's going to have on some of these projects because Siemens, we're not going to roll back that 90%. So the physical emissions reduction is going to happen. What we're seeing is that the timeline that we wrote for particularly these facility decarb projects is going to be impacted, and we're trying to understand how much it will be impacted. And so does 2030 start to come into play for some piece of that? Potentially, if we've got to wait on completing that electrification project 2 or 3 years longer than we had planned. And so I think we did a great job in our own four walls, right, of creating a plan to get us there and be ready for 90% electrification by 2030. And now we're starting to look outside because I don't know. I don't think we have an answer on the impact yet, but I think it will.
I'll just add one thing, which is less about policy, more about the market, which is that, I mean, I think one thing that we do feel good about is that some of the technologies that are really focused more around distributed energy production and storage, that those prices have been coming down. I mean, solar is like a tiny sliver of the cost it was 10 years ago, but it's also dropped by about 50% in the last 5 years, or actually less than that, 3 years for the solar modules. Battery prices had been coming down very sharply. They kind of stopped dropping for a while, and now it looks like they're coming back down again. So there are some technologies out there that can allow you to do more of this stuff behind the meter. If you have a really big load, obviously, that you need to meet in terms of demand, that there may be you can't do it all behind the meter, but there's more there now than there used to be.
Yeah, and I think we're experiencing that. So part of this facility decarb plan, of course, is to do everything we can on site. And what we're realizing is that for these big manufacturing facilities, we can't do enough on site to really move the needle. And so we are relying on, the utility to do that. So the other place that I would say it impacts us in terms of policy is less on directly in our operations, but into our supply chain. Because even just in the US, we've got something like 17,000 suppliers. Most of those are small, medium enterprises. And so they are looking to take advantage of the IRA and the tax credits, which of course we have a vested interest in helping them do because we've made supply chain emissions reduction commitments as well. And so that's a place where we're really focused, and I think that's a long road. But collaborating with those suppliers is also, sends a signal to the market as well. But that's, we really do have a vested interest in helping them. So we're starting to use corporate functions in different ways than we used to. So our government affairs team is super active even into our supply chain to help them navigate, okay, well, how do I apply for this grant, or how do I go after that tax credit and plan accordingly and budget accordingly? And so that's been something that we're investing people and money into that supply chain part of the equation because, again, we have a vested interest in them making improvements in their own operations.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And one of the key themes, Deloitte's running a lot of sessions at Climate Week this week as well. We had an energy transition session this morning, and one of the key themes there is we have to have broader collaboration, not just between public and private, but all the way through value chains as well, because different players coming together and working differently is the only way this gets done. Matt, I'm going to stick with you for a sec. Could you just talk about and I'm going to take something as a given that maybe I shouldn't, but it's going to add up to too much. Like there's going to be too much demand out there before supply comes online at the scale that it needs to, and so we need to use other mechanisms to manage that demand. Can you talk about the role that smart technologies can play in that? And I know that's part of Siemens' business, but that clearly seems to be part of what we need to deploy if we're going to manage that demand.
Yeah, I think part of something that we like to say is that we have the technology we need for the energy transition, right? The solutions are available to address the challenge, and so I think part of what we're doing at Siemens is to look at innovation a little bit differently. Typically, our corporate R&D organization would be funded by our business units who have a problem that they want to solve. What we're realizing is that in order to really get creative, it can't just come from the business units. So we can't rely on our business units to go out and say, our customers are dying for X, Y, and Z, or we see this need in the market, let's go out and let's go build something. What we're trying to restructure is how do we fund that corporate technology and R&D organization differently so that they can address more broad topics, particularly or specifically under this sort of umbrella of sustainability or decarbonization. So we're trying to rework a little bit of the organizations to help them function better than maybe we're used to working in terms of innovation in this space in particular.
Great. Ethan, back on policy and incentives, if you, and what we are trying to do here, if it's not too obvious, is bring public and private together to have conversations about how we work better together. But if you had to speak broadly to the private sector about how Treasury, or maybe you, think about the role of incentives, especially around managing the demand side of the equation around energy efficiency and getting us to a place where we have a more stable, more modern grid, do you have a kind of a theory of the case that you could lay out that the private sector should keep in mind?
That's a good question. So I would say, well, first of all, in terms of public and private, I mean, we're in the business of writing the tax regulations. So I talk to the private sector multiple times every single day because there are a lot of people who want to give us input on how it should be done, and we're very happy to take it. But we certainly have that kind of communication very frequently. In terms of thinking about the demand side, again. There are some very interesting programs around demand response, most of which are administered by power markets. They're not something that are done really by at the federal level too much. What we have tried to do is be supportive of giving all kinds of taxpayers, including residential homeowners, incentives to make the kinds of investments in energy efficiency and in energy monitoring so that they can improve the efficiency of their homes. And we've been really, really pleased by the uptake that we've seen so far. So, these credits are worth, further publicizing because, frankly, I think more people could know about them. But nonetheless, we saw about $22 billion worth of qualifying investments made by homeowners on things like installing insulation and making windows and other types of improvements. And they basically, we're talking about 700,000 U.S. homeowners who replaced insulation last year and got tax credits to get the cost deeply reduced. So, part of our role at Treasury is to just make sure more people know about this, because there are so many opportunities that you can take advantage of, but you do need to know what you're doing, and it's not always entirely clear. So, we're certainly trying to do more around that.
Right. So with just a couple minutes left, we're looking towards the future, and we're building out this hopefully ongoing collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. What is one, maybe two things that, if you could be the voice of the private sector and the public sector here, what are one or two things that you hope that group keeps in mind as we do this, and some of the vital things that we have to try to accomplish? And Matt, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think, and I feel like maybe I said this last year too. So, and it's, I don't know that it'll go away
We could use
fast enough.
reminding.
But yeah, every once in a while, yeah, sometimes it takes a few attempts. I think something that I try to remind our leadership team is to not overlook the seemingly simple work that can be done. And a lot of that is behavioral changes, right, in the way we're operating our facilities. Because the advice that I would probably give is that fundamental decarbonization is really not so unique to each of our organizations. And so to not overlook the seemingly simple by spending so much time trying to solve a bigger problem, you lose a little bit of time, you lose a little bit of momentum. So I think that's one thing I would say. And the other is maybe obvious, but I think critical, is to expand the ecosystem, because we are leaning on the experience of others all of the time. And something that I've experienced here every year, and in many rooms that I sit in, most people are willing to share their experience, right? If you can find public and private, right? Most people want to help the industry as a whole, regardless of where you are, make progress. And so I think it's still a little bit in this pre-competitive space, right, from our perspective, because so far the market's not really rewarding decarbonization progress. So it's still a little bit pre-competitive, so that means people are still willing to share their experience, and their experience is probably pretty similar to yours. So I would really encourage people to lean into that, because there's a lot that can be shared that may seem obvious, but it's there.
Right. Ethan, you get the last word here.
I'm going to try and do this in 12 seconds. Look, I think that the IRA is a fundamental game changer in terms of the way we're seeing investment occur here in the United States. And you just look at the numbers. And at its heart, though, what it actually is a series of literally millions of public and private partnerships. They may not be called as such, but when you create an opportunity for somebody to make an investment in a project and receive a tax credit for it, they are effectively partnering with the federal government to take advantage of that. Or when they receive a loan from the loan program's office to build a project with a new technology that may not have been used before. It is effectively, de facto, a partnership. So I think it is happening. We have a long way to go, but it's a very exciting time, and very happy with the progress we've seen.
Great. Thank you. Well, let's thank these panelists, and thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks. And I will call my partner, Ness Parker, up here.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's clap for Ness. Come on.
Did you see that hop? Did you see? And Pete, will you guys join me up here? All right. Here is a mic. Give us just a moment. Here you go. All right. All set? Brilliant. All right. Well, Matt and Ethan and Jeff, thank you for that. That was terrific. Good afternoon. We are really excited to be here. My name is Ness Parker, and we're going to be zeroing in on not just about collaborating for the energy transition, but collaborating with the community on the energy transition. So if that is interesting to you, you are in the right place. I'm so pleased to introduce Pete and Katie. Pete, as you know, is the Senior Director for Stakeholder Relations at Hydro-Quebec. Katie is the Vice President of Sustainability and Climate Strategy at Constellation Energy. I'm not going to ask you each to introduce yourself in those ways. I would love to hear actually from Climate Week this week. Has there been something that has already really resonated with you, or something that you're just so excited that you would tell this audience to go check out that session? Pete, over to you.
I can jump. I mean, super happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and I'll be as brief as Pete Rose is able to be. So sorry. I just came from a session, a really, really good one in Midtown, about disinformation in the energy transition and the importance. Actually, what's predicated on community engagement is actually, when you do that, you're going to successfully develop a project. And so we're doing that through the Champlain Hudson Power Express. We can get more into that later, but this wonderful project's going to deliver 25% of New York City's power starting in 2026, which is a real big deal. But it's been over a decade of journey. Every 340 miles, every mile of that 340-mile line has been through community engagement, and we wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't do it.
And just the need for communication and misinformation and disinformation.
And stay
Sounds
ahead
like
of it.
that
There's
session.
lots of nefarious actors out there.
I was
and
not
so-
expecting that answer.
Yes, no, you really have to stay ahead of the information curve.
Sure, makes sense. Katie, how about for you?
Well, I've been on the ground for all of, I think, 7 hours, but.
Welcome.
I
You made it.
certainly know, I've already had, one really interesting session and looking forward to a couple more this week on 24/7 clean, firm power. And that's something that I'm really seeing resonating a lot this year. Even, you can see a step change from last year's Climate Week and certainly several before that. And the focus, something that I think Pete and I could certainly agree on the need for decarbonizing the grid in a reliable manner and an affordable manner for all of the communities who need access to clean power, but they need it to be reliable and they need it to be affordable. And so some of the ways that, I'll be talking about it this week and engaging on it is through things as wonky as the greenhouse gas protocol and how emissions are measured by corporate buyers, through, public policies and also financing new clean energy development. And how do we value in all of those perspectives delivering clean, firm power every hour of the day to every customer in an affordable way.
Oh, I love that. Katie, I'm going to stay with you. Constellation recently put out your 2024 sustainability report, so congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was reading through it, and it was really incredible seeing both the implicit and explicit way that collaboration with the community was baked into that report. Can you talk about, from a corporate perspective, what was that process like? And perhaps if you're willing, did anything not make it into the report that you were really hoping would be in?
One of the challenges since I took over this role, we had been publishing a sustainability report for the last, 12, 13 years. And it was about 180 pages. We've gotten it down to 150 pages. And then we went through a separation with our old company, and I said, 50 pages, that's what we're gonna do. So I think that's helped with the readability and the accessibility of the report, but yeah, a lot of things end up on the cutting room floor, and you just have to find other avenues to get those stories out there. But on this year's report in particular, I think that we did intentionally try to weave throughout every topic, because if you look at the report, you'll see we talk about the clean energy transition, we talk about developing new nuclear, we talk about our philanthropic work, but throughout it all is where we really try to weave that piece of engaging our communities, where we do business and serve customers. Which, to some extent, we have a commercial business as well as our generation business. And so we're actually in 48 states in the US. And so that's quite a lot of work, but we also have people in place at the company. For instance, we have local engagement managers at each one of our nuclear plants. They live in that community, they know that community, and are continually conducting outreach in a sense, but it's also just being part of that community. And the one thing I'll say, hopefully this is a decent enough segue, that did not make it into the report, which we did have another avenue to release that last week, was an announcement of bringing back 3 Mile Island, our large nuclear plant in Pennsylvania, through a 20-year PPA with Microsoft. That is something that it feels good to have it out there and to be able to talk about it now. I think really transformational for the nuclear industry. And that was something that was on the cutting room floor for the sustainability report. We weren't quite ready. But having that out there now, being able to talk about the impact in the community of bringing that plant back has just been tremendous. It's going to be 600 direct jobs, 2,600 indirect jobs, $16 billion in tax revenue over the 20 years of the deal to Pennsylvania and the federal government. The scale of this, I think, is truly remarkable and will be transformational for the industry, but also for Pennsylvania and Londonderry Township in Pennsylvania that really had relied on that plant for local tax revenues, for employment, for their schools and their libraries. So we're just absolutely thrilled to have that coming back and to be doing it in a way that the community has welcomed this announcement with open arms.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I love sort of your point on sort of jobs and just like there's something so human about this work. And Pete, I know with Hydro-Quebec, you guys have been doing a ton of work on this over many years. Could you share a little bit, particularly because we're in New York, like what is happening here in New York with some of the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I mean, again, just to give a sense, this is the longest HVDC transmission line in North America being built to the nation's largest city, 340 miles buried. So you can imagine all the work and the diversity of the communities. And I would say I want to applaud New York State for baking it in a positive way into their climate law, that developers need to be investing and working in frontline communities or disadvantaged communities. So while it's in our DNA as Hydro-Quebec to do that, and proof positive that is actually this transmission line, we have an equity partnership with the Mohawk of Ganawagi. So we'll start with kind of upstream. Where this is leaving Quebec, we're going through an indigenous community where that indigenous community actually has a economic stake in the game, which was a game changer for everything. And as we go down, this line took, again, over a decade to be permitted, built, and we're building it right now. And community engagement with communities actually helped us shape where the line was going. So you start, A to B, and it kind of moves a little bit based on this engagement. As we get down into New York City, we're really working with communities in specifically NYCHA communities here. So if you're familiar with some of the NYCHA communities or public housing communities in New York City, where we have such, a difference between where we are right now in Midtown Manhattan with these huge skyscrapers and the disparity in terms of median annual incomes from some of these communities. And we were shocked when we went in, and it's $20,000 a year for a median income for a family of four. And we said, well, above and beyond the clean energy that we're going to be bringing in and the climate benefits and the local, air quality benefits, what can we do to help these communities? We like to tell this story because it's about talking authentically with the communities. And they said, we need help with chronic absenteeism. Said, okay, well, what's driving that? And a lot of it is because they're only bringing in $20,000 a year. A lot of it's like the kids aren't going to school 50, 60 days out of the year because they don't have clean clothes. So we, as a company, we looked at how do we add value to these communities? We started a laundry program in the communities in Astoria to address an issue that's not energy related, but it's related to an equitable and just transition that we're all trying to do. The project's going to be displacing a lot of fossil fuel. So in and of itself, in an EJ community, we're providing enormous benefits. But we're going a step further, and we're bringing the community to the table, listening to what their real needs are and trying to deliver.
I love that, and just sort of bringing them not just to the table, but saying, what do you actually need out of this? And it's laundry. Amazing.
And honestly, not that expensive. I say this openly. You can drop more money on a gala than you do on, doing clothes for 100 families for an entire year.
Yeah, but that's clearly meaningful. Wow. I was not expecting that one either. With that, though, we're sort of dancing around it, and I just want to directly ask. A lot of this is around workforce transition. How have you each been working on that from a community perspective? Katie, maybe over to you.
Sure. You're exactly right. And I should also say, going back to the nuclear industry, the skills needed in the nuclear industry are quite particular, and they are incredibly well-paying jobs, 6 figures at our nuclear plants. You don't have to have more than a high school degree to be a nuclear plant operator. You have to go through a lot of training and a lot of coursework. But these are incredibly good jobs. But it is that kind of staffing and training and workforce development that we have been investing a lot of money in. We have a program called Powering Change, where we are going into trade schools, community colleges, and universities to educate to bring students along the way on the skill sets needed to work at a nuclear power plant. That's one way that we're investing, but we also, as I was saying, try to invest in the community throughout, a person's experience in the community. So from elementary school, where we have community information nights and we invite the communities in, we bring Boy Scout troops and Girl Scout troops in to come look at the plant and kick and touch and feel and get to know it. We also have plant education nights annually at each one of our plants, where everyone can come in and ask questions, right? Because nuclear can be scary, and they want to ask questions and want to know what we're doing in their communities. And so that's another way to kind of educate folks on how the nuclear industry works and how they can also get involved, whether it's through the community or through careers. And then finally, I'll say a lot of our labor at the plants is organized labor. And we recently have signed a diversity pledge with the building trades to really try to help bring more diversity into the building trades and therefore some of the employees at our plants. But importantly, I'll say, diversity means a lot of things to everyone at Constellation, including economic diversity and what kind of backgrounds folks are coming to and having accessibility to these types of careers. So it's kind of a wraparound approach, I would say, from cradle to grave, if you will, about how we're trying to develop a community and a workforce around these plants.
Oh, that's terrific. And it makes so much sense, but just going into these communities and building trust over time was sort of something I implicitly heard you say in that, especially around this topic.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so important and critical to our continued social license to operate.
Yeah. Makes sense. Pete, how about for you?
Sure. I mean, to your point, it's wonderful what you're doing. You have to start at a really young age, so we have clean energy conversations with, middle schoolers who aren't ready to get into the workforce, but need to understand where they're going with this. And we support STEM programming, and so you can start to learn about the science and technology, engineering and math, and maybe get oriented towards that. We have for those that are actually actively looking to get into the workforce, we have a $40 million fund that goes to training, workforce training in disadvantaged communities, and we've already started to deploy that. And what does that do? It can get people that live in the housing that I was just describing before, that are in a cycle of poverty, $20,000 a year bringing in. You can start working on for a union. This Champlain Hudson Power Express is employing 1,400 union workers, right? And so it is intrinsically a union job. And that's going to be done in 2026. We're investing for the next 25 years in the next generation of workforce development for other renewable energies that are coming on. So we're seeing people going through trainings. They come out and they're doing pre-apprenticeship programs. They'll become an apprentice. They're learning while they're earning, and they can step into after they've done this for 4 or 5 years, six-figure jobs.
Sure.
Whereas for generations they've been stuck at the $20,000 a year. So it's transformational for neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And in the private sector, where we're doing the same thing, we're seeing New York City, look around. How many buildings we have? We have 1 million of them. They all need to be decarbonized. It's the largest source of emissions in New York City are the buildings itself. You have a lot of private sector companies that we're helping to do training where they're going through 14-week courses. Young people are going through, coming out, and getting placed over 80% in buildings because they're looking to become more efficient. People are getting jobs and making more than the minimum wage.
Right.
So we're actively part of this workforce development.
That's incredible. And I love sort of the long-term view as well as sort of starting young, so to speak, right? And it's game-changing, as you said. And we heard that exact term on the last panel. And I'm going to take us to public-private partnerships being game-changing. We've heard about the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. How have you both seen both of those pieces of legislation really changing the space that you're working in, and what sort of actionable strategies would you leave this audience with?
I can go first. I will make a disclaimer that the project that I'm working on, Champlain Hudson, is a merchant project, does not benefit from any of these funds. So we're deploying right now, we're building, I think it's absolutely, Ethan was talking about before, this is the largest investment in the United States for, clean energy and climate, and it's fantastic. And, maybe there's going to be an opportunity for us to be involved in some way, shape, or form. But I think intrinsically, providing this money, getting it down to the community level, that are forcing developers that are looking to get to take advantage of this money, forcing them to have these community engagement plans, to be structured, to have conditions on the funding coming through. I think it's game changing. The volume is just tremendous. Here, I can just speak to the offshore wind industry. I mean, they're building an entirely new industry we've never seen on the East Coast here. And just not far from here, if you want to go take a look, it's the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. They're preparing that for one of the largest offshore wind projects that New York's going to know. And it's all this money is driving this workforce development to do that. So while I can't speak from a personal perspective, because we're a little bit ahead of the curve on that, I think there's a lot of great things for New York and the U.S. to gain from this.
Awesome.
Well, without suggesting that we're behind the curve, we do take advantage of many of the tax credits in the IRA. In fact, the passage of the IRA was truly transformational for our industry. And that's because it was the first time in federal legislation that nuclear was recognized on the same playing field as other zero-carbon technologies. So we know for years and years we've had PTCs and ITCs for wind and solar. The IRA was the first time that a PTC was created for existing nuclear, and that truly transformed our industry. Tying it back to where I began, where we are excited to be reopening TMI and bringing it back online. The reason that plant shut down was entirely economic. It was one of our best performing plants in our entire fleet. But in the years leading up to the IRA, there were a lot of things going on in the energy markets. As you put more, zero carbon subsidized energy on the grid, energy prices go to zero, and so plants like a nuclear plant can't quite make it in that market. We had that situation in many of our states where they stepped in with things called a ZEC, which was a clean energy payment for a nuclear attribute. Pennsylvania did not have one of those programs, and so TMI being a single unit, which means that there's just one reactor on site, it didn't have the economies of scale of our larger units, and so we eventually had to make the very difficult decision to shut that plant down. If the IRA had been in place, that would not have happened. And so we see it as an incredible opportunity to bring that plant back to the community, to have a wonderful off-taker like Microsoft meet their climate goals. But that, I just think, is such an example of how policy can really create change in communities. Do I wish that that plant hadn't shut down and we hadn't lost that tax revenue for 5 years for those communities, that we didn't have, when you shut down a nuclear plant, fossil is what comes in to kind of backfill on the grid. So there were a lot of emissions in the last 5 years due to shuttering that plant. But the IRA has been absolutely transformational. We're bringing back nuclear. Now, of course, there are discussions of building new nuclear, and that's because of another tax credit in the IRA where they're transitioning those PTCs and ITCs for solar and wind into something called a tech-neutral tax credit. 45Y is the section, and that'll apply to all zero-carbon clean energy. And so that's where you're really going to see SMR technology will be able to take advantage of that. We can do something called uprates at our nuclear plants, which is where you basically do some efficiency work and you can get more generation out of that same plant. 45Y is going to make that possible at those plants. So I just think it's been an incredibly transformational piece of legislation for our industry. And then building on that, you just see the momentum globally behind the nuclear industry as a climate solution. And again, I'll just go back to these plants are drivers in communities of great jobs and great communities around them. So it really does all go back to policy in a sense.
It's such an important message. We're really running out of time. One maybe final thing from each of you, a call to action for this group listening here. Anything that you'd leave them with, Pete and then Katie.
Sure, I'll be really quick. I'll take the tagline. It's time to have, to be in communities on your own and not have people carry the water for you. If you're a developer, get in the community. That's the only way it's going to work.
I love that.
That perfectly said. I will just say, come visit a nuclear plant.
All right.
Come check one out. We'd love to host you.
You heard it here.
and it's an incredible experience.
Appreciate that. I have one as well, if we could go to the next page. If you weren't here in the very beginning, this is our commercial to continue this conversation. Hopefully you feel in your bones that we need to do more and that this conversation was just the beginning. Wednesday morning, you're invited to our Deloitte hub, just a couple of blocks away on Avenues of the America. We'll be joined by David Crane from the Department of Energy, Rachel Jacobson from the Department of Army, and having a conversation, and then even a cohort with Climate Group that we're really, really proud of. This cohort is meant to meet over the next couple of months and really dig into these issues. So if this is interesting to you, inspiring to you, your day-to-day job, please, please check out this QR code, and we would happily see if we can have space for you in our cohort. So with that, thank you so much to our panelists, both this one and the last one. I'm gonna give you guys a round of applause. And thank you to all of you. You had so many options today, so thank you for being here and being part of this conversation, and looking forward to the next steps with it. Take care. Thank you. Ooh, a mic, okay.